Great. Well, welcome, folks. This is Paul Martin here from Coupa's sourcing team, a subject matter expert in the area of sourcing, joined by an illustrious panel here today to discuss the topic of corporate social responsibility as it relates to sourcing. It's my pleasure to welcome our panelists. First of all, to tee things up, we've got Tiffany Hickerson, who's the Vice President at Kearney for their strategic operations practice, who's led for 10 years a variety of different leading procurement transformation projects within Kearney's clients, and also helps clients structure and grow their supplier diversity programs. So Tiffany, welcome to the panel.
Paul, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Next, we've got Dr. Eloise Epstein, a 20-year veteran and also a vice president at Kearney, a digital futurist who has recently co-authored a book called Procurement Disruption. You can find it on, or some Disruptive Procurement, apologies for that. You can find that on Amazon. Eloise, welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we've got Walt Charles, a digital transformation chief procurement officer with stints at companies like Kellogg's, Kraft Food, Biogen, and Allergen. He's an industry thought leader, innovator, and a futurist as well. You've probably seen him at organizations like ISM, Procurement Leaders, and ProcureCon. Walt, welcome to the panel.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, folks, all of us are very experienced sourcing professionals, having worked for over a decade in each case here, helping clients or working directly with supply chain designs, supplier selections. And we figure that in a general sense that in some industries, you're spending upwards of 70% of your sales revenue on supplies and supply chain. We've had a good deal of influence, both directly and within our clients, as far as where the money is going. So in so much as the currency is a vote, we've voted quite a bit sort of during our careers. And I know in speaking from firsthand experience, I've seen things like a single response to an RFI, a single response from an internal stakeholder on a scorecard, dramatically shift the way that we allocated our business to suppliers. And so it's with this sort of sourcing backdrop that I sort of introduce the topic of corporate social responsibility as a rather significant influence, not just on the work that we do, but on the markets that we create with regards to large companies and how they design their supply chains and work with their suppliers. So I'd like to sort of kick it off and get it off to the panel here by sort of the first piece is lead out with Tiffany. So we'd like to sort of discuss CSR in the context of sourcing, but do so not just as a check the box item, right? This isn't something that we want to just say, great, let's just go out there. We really want to strive for excellence when it comes to our CSR programs. And so my question for you is, what does it mean to be excellent at CSR sourcing? And why is it important for folks to be good at corporate social responsibility in the context of sourcing?
So I think what it means to be excellent is it's embedded in the company's DNA and how they conduct business. I think that companies that are best in class at CSR already have it included in everything they do, especially when you think about sourcing. So the questions aren't necessarily around should we be inviting diverse suppliers, they're already there. And it's ensuring that we are looking at the portfolio of suppliers that represent the supply chain, that those suppliers represent the communities that our clients support and the employees that make up our clients. And I think your second question was why should it be important? Was that your second point?
Yeah, why is it important to folks to get it right?
To get it right. Well, I think if you think about what we're going through now in light of COVID, right, we're living at work, right? And it is important for employees to feel that they're bringing their whole selves to work and that the values that they have outside of work are also factored inside the working environment as well. So I think it's just being truly authentic to what's important to you as an employee and ensuring that your companies are aligned with those same values.
Excellent. Dr. Epstein, the same question to you. What, in your estimation, is excellence in CSR and why is it important?
Well, let me start with the why it's important. I want to build off what Tiffany said because our consumers expect it. and we cannot produce products that do not take into account how they were produced. Were they using, conflict minerals? Are they using plastics that are just going to go straight into a landfill, single-use type containers? All of these things matter because despite some people's opinions, the environment and global warming and climate change are real, and these are issues that need to be tackled. And when governments abdicate that responsibility, it's the imperative that businesses have a step in, and that's what we've seen. And so we're going to continue to see more of that because consumers will very easily move and switch, and so it's imperative to it is imperative to any product that you're creating, and it's not even that can be true as well for B2B products as well, right? Because you're seeing that with Zoom in particular, where they were doing some shady things with people's data, and so I think in general you have to put CSR front and center, and by the way, with the Zoom I meant with privacy, and so companies have to behave in a way that they've never had to before.
Great. And Walt, would you care to add to what both Tiffany and Dr. Epstein have said?
Yeah, I think it's kind of an and story. I've had the privilege of working at some pretty awesome companies with extraordinarily high CSR frameworks in place, and so high standards in terms of those frameworks. And so for us, and for many of the companies that I've had the privilege of working for, it's about meeting the customer where he or she wants to be met, right? And with the right value proposition, with the right embodiment of the values that embody what the key customers are. And I think the challenge that we've got to divine as leaders is where there is a cost increase to actually deliver something. Are our customers willing to pay that or not? And is it going to disadvantage us or not? Those are the questions that you've got to figure out how to divine within your respective businesses. Because you don't want to make from a product perspective, you don't want to make a $20 product for a $5 problem in the context of a broader business, right? So that's some of the thoughts that I would add to what folks, and I agree with what both Tiffany and Eloise have mentioned earlier.
Excellent. And there seems to be a theme there really to kind of focus on the results. And so I know you sort of tickled on that idea there, Walt, with the idea of sort of measuring value. And so I guess, Tiffany, my question for you is, how do you help the sourcing professionals get over their strong preference to report cost savings and look at the more advanced sort of formula of value? And what does that formula look like as far as being able to measure the tangible value that you get from this sort of excellent CSR program?
Well, I think the metrics that are used as you think about CSR being broader will vary by topic within that umbrella. But if I were to take, say, supplier diversity, I think there is a common myth that by leveraging diverse suppliers, you will then in turn pay more money. And that is incorrect, right? So I think the way that we have shown the value is for organizations to have the visibility to track those suppliers and to see that, most times those suppliers are just as competitive, if not even more competitive than some of the non-diverse suppliers. So it's really getting that visibility, having that scorecard in place. And of course, our clients, as you said in my intro, are very focused on cost savings. So that is definitely, something that they're not willing to pay more for per se from a supplier, but it's just getting the visibility of who those suppliers are, giving them a chance to compete during the process. And most times those suppliers are by far the most competitive suppliers because they don't have the same overhead costs and they're much smaller organizations, but many of our clients are just not aware of those suppliers to invite into their competitive bids.
Yeah, then Dr. Epstein, curious as you talk about sort of the fragmentation of the suppliers getting more fragmented, more specialized. How does that impact the challenge for sourcing people?
Well, I think I would add and say this is why having a good supplier network, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, but part of the problem is the supplier identification, whether they're diverse suppliers or not, or CSR related suppliers in any way, shape, or form. We struggle mightily with having good supplier lists. And in today's day and age, there's no excuse for that. And when you have good, clean supplier data, a single source of truth for your supplier master, that starts to unlock a lot of things. So when you go into these sourcing events, there's no reason you can't have the granularity you need around the suppliers that you invite. And so what that does is that gives you the ability to, I don't know, run an event with only diverse suppliers, or run a different event with where you actually, if you're going to really go to the next level, where you change the, if you're doing advanced sourcing, the coefficient, so that you have, you ensure sustainability, you're making sustainable choices. So I think that's kind of how so I don't think the fragmentation is as much of a problem. It's more about segmentation and around having good supplier data.
And Walt, I saw kind of a wry smile of agreement when Dr. Epstein mentioned the data. How do you, in the day of fake news and alternative facts, sort of vet out sort of credible information that you can take action on?
Well, I mean, I'll talk about it in the context of the Ann story, and I think Tiffany alluded to this, right? Actually, the real Ann story is you can actually get cost savings and diverse suppliers and sustainable suppliers and the other things you might want to get activated within your business. But you've got to have a process and likely a different set of tools than likely Excel, which is what you're using, to figure out how to get there. Now, Dr. Eloise talked a little bit about, and I was kind of chuckling under my breath. It's mightily challenging for procurement teams to find suppliers that meet those diverse populations, that where you've got the data to actually, and you can unpack it in a logical way to get after it. Now, Paul, I know you're a CSO or an optimization subject matter expert within Coupa.
Guilty as charged.
Right, and by the way, I wish everyone looked at kind of an optimization engine first as a way to kind of look at all of the various dimensions that we're trying to solve for within our bids, so that we can actually unpack the cost consequence of those decisions and provide those choices in a data-driven way to our stakeholders in the business. And one of the things that I've been able to do, I think, reasonably successfully is leverage optimization. And I also leveraged finding more suppliers with a much more granular lens by using other tools to help, because the other challenge, Dr. Eloise, and I'll just air some dirty laundry from procurement people, right? Many of us are stuck in a 3 bids and a buy world, right? Why is 3 bids and a buy the de facto standard? Why? Because we wrote it in our policies that says you must, at a minimum, for certain dollar amounts, provide 3 bids on the stuff that you're doing. Now, what that automatically means is that you're excluding 99% of the population of suppliers on the mix if you're only including 3. That's the dynamic that I think we need to figure out how to purposefully attack, because with all the disruption going on in this Industry 4.0 world that we live in today, those old guard 3 guys that we have are being disrupted by other next generation game-changing suppliers that I believe our job as procurement leaders should be to find purposefully those disruptors and bring their differentiated value proposition to our business so that we can actually drive value from it. So for us, so those are some of the challenges of 3 bids and a buy. It's a busted framework. It becomes the de facto way that most of our deals get done, and finding suppliers that meet the broader population of stuff is also a challenge that increasingly there are solutions that are out there that are helping procurement professionals solve, which is great.
And let me add on that, because part of this digital disruption is exactly automating all of that low value activity. And so to you know, if you're doing 3 bids in a buy, I can automate that. And I can not only automate it with 3 bids, I can put it out to 100 automatically. So my challenge to CPOs is, okay, so then what's your team going to do now, right? And so I love like busting that framework because, which I'll probably borrow that wall, because you know, like I can automate that basic cost saving. So now we have to, Paul, to your question earlier about, you know, how do we move beyond cost? We need to do risk avoidance, sitting in the middle of COVID, right? But we also need to look at CSR and innovation. And where, you know, what I took from what you were saying is you know, it's bringing those suppliers in, getting them into the mix, and then the innovation that comes with it. That's, as procurement, what we need to be doing, because the busted framework, I can automate that. That's already being automated.
Right. Well, I think too, with that, Eloise, is once it's automated, you need to make sure though the right suppliers are still included in that process. And that's where organizations have to have, you know, you can have a target of what the minimum number of diverse suppliers that should be included in every process. And unfortunately, you know, you do need to have some of those guardrails to ensure that it happens. But I think as companies get more exposure to the wide breadth of suppliers that could meet those requirements, then it becomes easier to do it. I think one thing that I've seen with clients, though, is it's quite interesting on how organizations define CSR and what's included. So I think often just starting with the basics of what is it and how do we define CSR in terms of, you know, I spoke earlier about diversity of suppliers, like what truly will account for diverse suppliers, and ensuring that those definitions, even in CSR, sustainability, innovation, all of that is very, very clear to an organization. So when you're evaluating suppliers, it's on an apples to apples scale.
And then Walter, I want to come back to you to pick up on what Tiffany was talking about. You know, one of my challenges in being a sourcing optimization subject matter expert is that damn word optimization. It is often misunderstood, and it sounds like we're just propeller heads sort of in this piece. And so I'd like to tie that back to a business process and kind of pick up what Tiffany's talking about is, A, how do you consider all the different attributes, right? It's not a binary thing, to Tiffany's point around their diverse supplier. There's more dimensions to that, right? So our willingness to include those. And then if you could, Walt, from a business process, talk a little bit about when do you shortlist your suppliers?
Yeah, so great. So when I was taught how to do procurement in the dark ages, Methuselah said, right, that Walt, you should go out to 100 suppliers or as many as you can find with a questionnaire, have them respond to that questionnaire, and basis the responses, determine who you're going to include in the RFP. And the RFP shouldn't include more than, I don't know, 5 or 6 people, right? That was because if you had Excel on the back end, you didn't want to overly burden the analyst pool with, you know, evaluating 100 suppliers worth of data when you're really only going to consider 5 or 6, right? That was the old guard framework. Now, by the way, for a lot of people that are still stuck with the same old tools that I was using back when Methuselah taught me, like spreadsheets, right? That's the right call. That's a way to purposely make sure you're focusing on the things that you think make sense. But I have a different model, right? I call it a constraintless bidding model, right? If I didn't have the constraint of Excel telling me how I would source, and I said, if I was going to do an unconstrained view of how I was going to approach this marketplace with the objective of getting fair market value for everything that I was doing, how would I source differently? And what I said was, okay, that looks like me going out to 100 suppliers and keeping 100 suppliers in the mix. Don't down select basis a questionnaire, down select basis real data from the bids where you can actually have a fact-driven, data-driven decision around who should be included and who shouldn't. And what you'll find is amazing, right? You'll find that in most cases, 90% of the questions that you had on that questionnaire were freaking irrelevant, right? That's the problem, right? And you would have been excluding a big chunk of suppliers on the basis of an irrelevant question to begin with, right? That's just reality. The second thing you find is that this notion that with constraintless bidding, that you can power up, that competitive friction drives a much better lens for what the market is really telling you that product or service is worth, right? And so by including more players, you end up with a much better view of what fair market should look like, in what part of the world it looks like. And you're able to then inform and use those data to inform how your business should take the decision, right? And I believe, and so I'm going to say some anti-procurement stuff now. I've never focused on savings. And by the way, my teams have delivered between 150% and 299% increase in savings rates. Savings is an artifact of a robust sourcing process and accountable leadership. It's not a goal. It's not the end all, right? The goal is to deliver whatever the goals and objectives are for that particular product or service, right? If it's marketing materials, getting the collateral out and getting the stuff on TV, right? So that whole dynamic around down selecting, by the way, is a busted framework. And when I write my disruptive procurement book, it will have a these are the things we were taught that in the context, in a lens of Industry 4.0 tools and technologies, need to be rethought, because they're no longer valid, and in fact they are hurting your ability to drive the best possible set of outcomes for your business in one person's view. And I've had the privilege of being, CPO, SVP guy at a number of companies where I could actually tell people how I was going to keep score. Right? I want you to get after having diverse suppliers, and I want you to use this tool. It's an optimization tool. I didn't call it optimization. I called it a big data analytics platform that drove, quite frankly, that had RPA in it, embedded in it, that automated many of the steps that my guys were just taking too much time to kind of get to actionable answers on. And so that's kind of how I've messaged it. And again, I had to actually unlearn with my teams at 4 major Fortune companies the old stuff in light of the new capabilities that are imbued in these new technologies, including the CSR framework of things that we should be factoring in all the stuff we're buying.
So while I would agree, I think leading procurement organizations don't only lead with, say, savings. I think the name is now really being more redefined to the value delivered, right? So you don't want to give the impression that you're going with the lowest cost solution and not supporting your business stakeholder and overall company goals.
Sure.
And I think what we've seen through the work that Kearney's done and around our assessment of excellence in procurement is really looking at what are those drivers that companies are using to measure themselves on. And you're right, so it could be percent of diverse suppliers that you're bringing in the process, that spend that's flowing through them, how you're meeting your CSR goals, and then overall those dimensions will then in turn say this is what, as a procurement organization, we're delivering to the overall company. So you're right. I think many are trying to move around from we're just a savings engine. We're more of a value creation engine for the company.
And I'll put my propeller cap back on because what both Walt and Tiffany are talking about here is a key tenet of game theory, which is as much transparency and as much information you're willing to share with suppliers as to how you're going to award the business is the biggest lever you have in your negotiations. So their perception of any uncertainty leads to hedging and higher prices. And so that transparency and that the decision criteria being shared is an important market lever, independent of any technology or process. Thank you both. Now, Luis, I want to come back to you and sort of open up the discussion here around, okay, great, we've got the definition of excellence well defined. We're looking at how we're going to measure their value and the results. How do we make sure that these programs are sustainable, that they're not just sort of one-offs and we've got a little project, a little pocket? Just given all the tentacles that we have inside of the theme of CSR, it seems like we could be successful in one of the 8 arms and the other 7 go missed. Any advice to folks as to how to make these programs sustainable?
I have one very clear perspective, and granted I'm biased because this is what I do, but it's all about digital. and it's a digital allows us to embed this into it allows us to embed CSR into the way we operate. And so that transcends one person, one regime, one whatever. And so if we start, and this is why I'm very keen on having a good supplier network. If you have a good, strong supplier network and you're feeding the sourcing tools, it's built in. The plumbing's there, the suppliers are there. Now we can talk about further upstream of how folks get into the supplier network, which is a different, set of requirements. But if you have a good supplier network and you have that, piped right in, and you have the processes that Walt was talking about and Tiffany, then you actually can, then it just becomes embedded. And if you're going to invite 100 suppliers, the people running the events don't really need to know. It's just, whether, they're diverse or not. They're just flags, right? You don't have to go make a special effort. And in fact, you can actually just make it automated that by default, every qualified diverse supplier gets invited, as an example, or sustainable, or so on and so forth. And then after you award the business, and then pushing that same methodology into the requisitioning process, right? If you want to talk about busted processes, what we contract is not what we buy. And so the more that we can embed those buying choices downstream, either further downstream and really closing that loop. And if you want to talk about measurement and measuring what we actually requisition, that's how you make this sustainable. And so it may sound cliche to talk about digital, but this is in the procurement value chain. You can draw a clear line from upstream all the way downstream, and as it relates to CSR, and you can embed it at every step.
And it seems like a theme, because that's building off of what both Tiffany and Walt said. It's the sort of theme or philosophy of doing what you say you're going to do. Yeah. And that carries a lot of sort of clout. And so, Dr. Epstein, that's a more compliance piece versus on the front end of the planning process saying, hey, this is the criteria, this is what's important to us, this is how we're going to award the business, this is how you can win the business, and then awarding it appropriately. Because I know I find that myself, I give a couple times a week advice to folks to say, if you're running an auction and you tell people that you have the right to reserve and change your decision after the fact, pretty much erodes the whole design of putting pressure through that auction side of things. So you want to be sort of transparent there, and then obviously you want to make sure that you're buying off of that contract. Tiffany, I want to come back to you. Yep.
Yeah, can I build off of that point with Dr. Epstein there? Eloise, we work closely together. I know from work that you and I have done together and talking with other clients, this is often a point where a question that may be there with those watching this is, how do I start, or where do I start on digital? Because I think a lot of the clients that we've talked to know that digital is the way to move forward. But Walt, to your point, I think there is still a lot of clients that are using Excel, and they're still going through that process. And so I just wanted to have Eloise speak to that, because I think that's often the follow-up question is, how do I think about starting, and where do I begin in that journey?
Well, you could read my book, but no, there's no excuse, right? And Walt talked about it with the Industry 4.0 tools. And I mean, if you have the right leader and the right motivated team, like the leaders in this space seek these tools out, right? The ones that I help are, they need guidance to get there. And so to your question, Tiffany, it really starts with the motivation. It really says, it's just like with CSR, right? It's like, you have to want to do this, and you have to want to do the heavy lifting to get it there. And to start is because there's such great tools. Start at the supplier network, because that will feed the entire value chain. I keep harping on that, but that's very top of mind. Get a good core transactional P2P system in, get good spend visibility. These are just the basics, right? And then really dig into your sourcing tools and get those tuned up and get your, and rewrite your processes. Do procurement for the 21st century. Don't do that, forget what was saying, the procurement that we all grew up with, that's not relevant in the digital world. So again, supplier network, transactional P2P, and then sourcing and so forth, and that will get you on your way. I mean, it's not like if we're trying to create a new product and deduce who's going to buy it, like that takes sophisticated analytics and things we don't know. Everybody on this panel knows exactly what we need to do in procurement and how to do it excellent, right? So it's not it's not a secret. We all know. And it's not, we don't have to deduce it. So
yeah, Paul, I'd like to just add on that. So as a CPO that was tasked to deliver, when I got to Kellogg's the first time, my first day, my boss says, I want you to deliver 150% more than we've ever delivered in our 100-year-old history. That's what we're grappling with as CPOs every day, right? Now, the challenge is I'm managing $10 billion, 300 people, they're all strewn across the planet. How do you put guardrails on the processes they're using to deliver the outcomes you want in the aggregate without, and by the way, 90% of us just measure the end goal stuff. How much did I save? What's that percentage? How much stuff is under contract? What's that percentage? Right? It's all terminus, not actionable. It's in the rear view mirror. We've already passed it. Right. And so the question, so I said, well, what I need is a forward-looking solution. There wasn't one in the market, so I built one. Right. I said, what I need is a solution that helps my stakeholders deal with the rubric problem of, okay, who are the preferred suppliers for the stuff that we're about to buy in when it's sitting on somebody's laptop or in a shared drive in some other part of the globe, busted. Right. And so I said, well, I'm going to build the stuff that doesn't exist in industry, and I'm going to have it purpose built for my companies so that we can actually deliver better outcomes. And so in addition to the stuff that Alois was talking about around P2P and supplier network, ultimately you need to connect that, my view, with a solution that manages your source to contract. Because quite frankly, 95% of the value that procurement unlocks from their strategic team isn't in the transactions of the business in P2P. It's in the how did you do the deal of at the time that took you from finding the need to identifying the contract. That's where the value is unlocked for most procurement teams. It's lost on the execution sometimes, Alois, to your point, right? What you contracted may not be what you're buying, but in the main, most of the value is created there. And how do you make that world class? And how do you take out the losses that exist within that? So that's so I actually built a 16-step or 16 process or 16 plank initiative around constraintless bidding to help change the execution modality from a rearward-looking to a forward-looking. And it's been game-changing for the companies that I've had the privilege of leading. And I'm now trying to evangelize it with as many folks that will listen, because I believe every single CPO that wants to get after digital transformation can do not only the stuff that Alois was talking about, but also could focus on source to contract in a way that's unprecedented, the way I've done it at a couple other companies. So that's backstory.
So I've got an anecdote, Walt, related to former employer, but then a question to sort of follow there, which is a colleague of mine was recently sharing a story in which he was in Silicon Valley meeting with a tech company, and it was skateboards and shorts and foosball tables. And then after that meeting, hopped on a flight and found himself in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where they still had phosphates and egg cream sodas, right?
I lived in Kalamazoo, so I know two stoplights. Got it. Yep.
Yes. And so my question is, how much of this movement we're talking about going digital is generational, and is there a word of advice you would give to the older pros like myself, that weren't raised on anything other than spreadsheets and relational databases as to the need or to sort of dig deep and find that desire to make that change management?
So let me give you at least one person's view, and I certainly welcome the lens that Tiffany and Eloise can lend to this, but from one person's view, there are two types of CPO. One type that leads you to the promised land, and one type that basically implodes all the leaders and has to change everyone out to get to the promised land. Right? I'm decidedly the first part, and in fact, anytime I've interviewed, I said, look, I'm not trying to implode what you got, and then it becomes a question of skill or will. Most procurement people absolutely can be trained to leverage digital technologies to get after unlocking more value. And my proof point will be just Kellogg's. 299 of the 300 people that started with me continued with me, and we were able to deliver in the first year 190% increase in savings rates with the same people, demonstrating that they were able to pivot from what they were doing for the first 100 years to something that was materially better in a year to deliver 190% increase in savings rates. And so it's a skill or will question more than anything. And does that older person have the will to pivot from how they've been doing it for most of their lives, maybe overly indexing on relationships and less on data, right? Or not. And I found at 4 companies now that most of the folks absolutely want to pivot and want to get unencumbered from dealing with an Excel universe that's going to mire them in pivot table hell for 2.5 months on every major deal, trying to get to analysts, data, right? So the analytics on it. So I believe, so that's just one view, but I'd love to get the perspective of Tiffany and Eloise. I think everything is trainable if you want to do it, if you want to go on the journey.
And let me just add, Walt, there too, that I recently saw the study that the Generation Z combined with Generation X, and the combination of, Generation Z represents 40% of consumer demand coming online. And so if you think about that, the second survey that I saw as a follow-up to that is close to 80% of that generation values companies that look after the environment, that are consistent with the CSR themes. And so you've got a huge slice of the consumer market and demand that's coming to bear with a heavy bias towards these CSR themes. So I just want to kind of throw that out there in support of the need to sort of evolve in this direction. And Tiffany, wanted to turn it over to you to respond to Walt's challenge.
Yeah. Well, just to even follow up on your comment, Paul. I spent a lot of my time working with schools and talking to students that are entering their career. And you're absolutely right. CSR is a conversation that I find myself having earlier and earlier with students, and they want to make sure that organizations that they work with do exhibit those values that are near and dear to them. So you're absolutely right that that's becoming more and more of an important topic, and organizations need to be able to respond to that to attract the most that high potential talent earlier in their career. But to your point, Walt, about I think the generations, I feel like my parents may watch it, so I'm not going to say that the older generations struggle with technology, so I will on the record say that. But I think that COVID has disrupted and challenged everyone to think about how to leverage technology and digital platforms to be more efficient. So I think, in light of all of this uncertainty and difficulty, I think that will be one of the benefits that come out of this pandemic, is that more organizations and individuals will embrace technology going forward. So I think that hopefully we'll overcome. But I do think, to your point though, Walt, about the skill and will, I think when we go into organizations that are very mature procurement organizations, and you're dealing with category managers that may have been in their role for a very long time, often they're leaving with this why something can't happen, and why this solution won't work. And let me give you the backstory of, all of my experience and why this doesn't work. Instead of, and where I would come in is the challenge. Well, what does it take to remove that barrier? And let's start peeling the onion back to get to the root cause. And often, if you can get CPOs such as Walt and others to support that dialogue, often you'll find that those constraints no longer exist. And it's just getting people to be more to leave more as to why not versus why something can't happen.
Yeah, Paul, I'll actually put a
Yeah.
layer on top of that, right? So I'll just give you with a story because I think stories compellingly tell you what's going on here. So I had the world famous subject matter expert for juices at Kraft. This person was the SME that everyone went through in the business, and we were trying to buy juice.
Just like me for sourcing optimization. Thank you, Walt.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to buy juice for apple juice. I'll pick a juice. We're trying to buy apple juice, and we had always bought them domestically, always gotten after it, whatever, right? And so I sit down with them with my data sheet, and I say, okay, help me to understand. You're about to do a juice bid. How come you've eliminated 90% of the population of the people on the planet in the juice growing areas for apples? Well, he said, well, the cost to ship that stuff from Bratislava, Poland, all these other places that grow apples is just prohibitively high when we're manufacturing in the US. That's been the conventional wisdom, so we don't even consider it anymore. And I said, well, are you sure you're not looking at old lens? Can you give me the fact base with actual quotes, inclusive of the distribution and trans exposure, to give me the data to validate that what you're telling me is in fact correct? And I think if we can get more CPOs requiring of the people that are coming to them to sign these multi-million-dollar deals, give me the fact base, give me the data set that supports the award recommendation in a way that I can understand it and communicate it and support it. That's critically important. And oftentimes we get a very short email without a lot of data saying, hey, I need this $10 million thing signed without any real substantive information around why it's the right thing for the business to do. And I believe the future, Paul, quite frankly, is around big data analytics for the stuff we're doing, which is including the CSR components. And it's really an and story, and you can do both. You can get after cost reduction, cost savings, and get after the CSR agenda that you've got for your business. But you've got to be able to measure it and get a fact base for it to decide against it. And so those are some of the points. And by the way, the long and short of that story, we ended up finding out that because Russia had done something bad, I think invaded Crimea, people in Poland stopped shipping juices, apple juice specifically, of the spec that we needed to Russia, and they were sitting on a glut of juices that we could buy at a fraction of the cost that we otherwise would have bought. We ended up saving north of 20-something% on that particular bid by buying it from Poland, shipping it to the US because of what was going on at the local level and with that political dynamic. And so he didn't have the fact base. And when he came back with the tail between his legs saying, hey, Walt, yeah, it looks like the fact base supports us buying the stuff from Poland, not from where we've always bought it at a higher price. It was prima facie evidence that data should be what dictates how we take decisions, not how we feel and gut, and whether they come from SMEs or not.
Well, and let me add to that, right? And I connect the 2 points because Tiffany is much more gentle than I am. I come in with that, with exactly your type of perspective, and I don't give people the chance. I'm very confrontational. Well, not confrontational, but very direct in saying, like, why do I even need that category manager? Because that fact base, much of it, 90% of it, can be automatically generated. I can get those feeds in, I can get those bids out, and that changes the whole tenor of the discussion, which doesn't make me right, because I think Tiffany's way is better, but that still doesn't stop me, because it really puts people to like, well, wait a minute, it really sets up. It sets up the dynamics that, Walt, you're talking about, because if I can collect 90% of that information on the juice market and I can track it in real time and I can make predictions on that, and that, building on your analytics point, which I totally agree with, it's like we can start to look forward. Then the category manager is actually not telling me what we can or can't do. They're telling me what we should or could do.
Correct.
And by the way, then we can start tracking it, because then there's an opportunity cost of where we could have taken an action, where the machine gave us a recommendation, and maybe we took it, maybe we didn't. But that's if you're a category manager, that's what you're competing with. You're competing with intelligent machines that now, is it all, can I just like pull it off a shelf today and give it to you? No, I mean, we're in this evolutionary period, but this is where category management's going. And as a CPO, as a leader, like you were talking about, Walt, you have to enable this kind of culture because it's coming, and the leaders that group one are pushing the boundaries on this.
Let me do my job and moderate that a bit, which is I think that the answer probably is somewhere in the middle. And I say that having spent 20 years working with the subject matter experts in categories. Oftentimes, I know in some cases the teams I worked with had a minimum of 20 years experience in that particular function. And what I've seen is, to the points we're talking about here, is that subject matter expertise is important in building the model that then can be tested to Walt's point with the data. So being able to get the heuristics from the experts is the starting point to building a good model that then can be tested by the data, and then ultimately, Dr. Epstein, automated and digitized in a much more effective way. But the fact that that SME knew the transportation costs had historically been high and that was cost prohibitive is a good starting point to saying, hey, add the unit price plus the transportation to get the total landed cost. I mean, it's a simple example, but I find that in other areas like reinsurance recently, that there are some experts that know a lot of tricks and have a lot of heuristics that do a nice job of beginning to design things that you would represent digitally.
I think I'll say, I think what Eloise you're getting at, but correct me if I'm wrong, is I think the future of procurement organizations will look differently, right? So the category manager's role or the SME's role now may not be as tactical in nature as it had been, right? So even to your point around the analytics, you'll now have digital to run those analytics to show you the trends in the pricing and where those opportunities are. But I think that category manager or that role now will be focused more on partnering with the business, setting what the strategy will be, instead of spending so much of their time on those tactical activities that have been traditional procurement. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And Eloise and I go back and forth on this all the time. I think procurement's still there, but what procurement looks like and how you spend your day to day will be very, very different. I think most procurement organizations are excited about that opportunity.
Yes, and I would agree too. I can harken back to the 20 years I've been in procurement, and I remember that procurement and sourcing professionals were basically people that had hurt themselves on a plant floor and found themselves sitting behind the desk, to the point around being much more tactical function. And it's through the good work of CPOs, like Walt, and sort of the diversity we see in the ranks now, adding universities, I think, and this sort of investment in world-class programs that have really upgraded the profession of procurement to be something more strategic. Pandemics like this obviously help the strategic importance of the work that we do. We've seen other examples of that. But certainly seems to be a ripe time for the youngins, so to speak, to get into procurement. Okay, folks, wanted to open the floor to any considerations relative to CSR that my questions have not afforded you the luxury to speak to. So kind of an open forum piece here. If there's anything that came in ready to speak to that I haven't touched on with my questions, please, it's open mic time.
So Paul, all I would say is for organizations that are watching this webinar, I would urge you all to challenge yourselves on doing more and looking at your organizations to see what more can you do in the space of CSR and really getting a cross-functional team to put together plans. Because I think this is a unique time, but in the time that we're in today, it's more and more important that companies look at themselves and do a diagnostic of what they can do to improve on those initiatives.
Dr. Epstein, care to add?
Yeah, well, I think the way we define CSR is going to get more expansive and complicated, and rightly so, because right now it's a broad umbrella term, doesn't always have the impact. Sometimes it's a check the box activity. And Well, first of all, I think that the demand is there, right? As we talked about, from consumer demand and so forth. But also, as consultants, we see what's on the leading edge because that's what we try to define, and we, in essence, complicate it because that's how we sell more work. But I think getting more nuanced and detailed to just say diverse suppliers is not really going to be enough, because in each geography, that's going to mean something different, which means we need better answers. We need better suppliers. We need better supplier lists that we can invite to these events. We need better granularity around what it means to be sustainable, right? And, does that mean, transportation costs? Does it mean, the type of packaging? Does it mean, what does that mean? And then there are things that we talk about in passing, and this is where a lot of my current research is on things like modern slavery and conflict minerals, and that we sort of check the box, and we just take it de facto that, okay, we checked the box. But the last time we checked the box was on risk modeling, and we checked the box on risk modeling without actually properly accounting for pandemics. So I think there's a lot of slack when we talk about CSR, and I think it's really important to get to that, because all it takes, especially if you're an apparel, brand, or all it takes is one big, one big event, and that will totally torpedo your brand. And I don't think in this day and age, and this is beyond just retail, but I think you have to get ahead of this stuff. You don't want to be the CPO that's sitting in your office when the CEO walks in and asks you why the Rainforest Action Network is protesting outside, or, like there's a lot of protests, that could show up on your front lawn. So if you're controlling the supply base, you need to get ahead of this. So I think CSR, that was a long-winded response, Paul, but I think really getting nuanced and not taking anything in CSR, or risk, by the way, for granted.
And Walt, care to summarize?
Yeah, as I was thinking about both Tiffany and Eloise's response, I'll say this. I think as a CPO, a practitioner, we need to really look hard at the tools we are using to unpack the choices we are making. I believe corporate social responsibility agenda is an and story, that not only do we in procurement have to deliver savings, have to deliver what the business needs are, have to deliver contract agility, have to deliver risk mitigation, have to deliver all of these things, we also need to deliver diversity, sustainability, environmental health and safety objectives of our company. And if we're using an Excel kind of framework, a spreadsheet framework, to weigh all of those data sets that are in many cases competing for the same dollars and that same choice, then we're likely using the wrong tool for that analysis. I would suggest that folks that are here, that are listening, you need to look at an optimization framework, and to use the parlance of you, Paul, as a means to make better decisions across many different, sometimes competing things for the money of your company. And you need to unpack those data in a way where you can quantify what the cost consequence is for your business partners. And so that's the ask that I would have, is that everyone do some navel gazing, take a hard look at the tools you're using, and if they're, and I'll use my very technical term, I'm an engineer by training, if they're busted, pivot. that would be my comment.
And then I'll leave it to either Tiffany or Dr. Epstein. Any words in summary?
Oh, no, I mean, I'd be more aggressive even and say there's no excuse to be using the old tools, and like like you can't compete, like, and you can't even operate. Like there's been a lot of mediocre tools, and I've railed on them for many years now. Like it's not acceptable to have mediocre tools, and to just operate, we've sort of let that go by, and collectively as an industry, and we can't let that go anymore. We need better tools, because precisely for the reason that we need to move the needle on CSR, we need to move the needle on risk, and still maintain, creating value. So, I double down on Walt's comments and just, in my own provocative way, really be aggressive about it, because there's no excuse to be languishing in the 1990s.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I agree with all the comments. I think it's the more you know, the more competitive you can be, and the more efficient and effective the procurement organizations can be. So yeah, look at yourselves and do more.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. I certainly appreciate this. It's been a nice sort of lively beginning of the conversation, certainly to be continued. I appreciate the sort of exploration of what does it mean to be excellent with regards to CSR and sourcing. Really like the sort of focus on the results. How do we change it from a savings-based into a more sophisticated conversation around what is the value that's sort of being driven through this process? And then just some of the tips, whether it be the digital, the process, the education, around ensuring that people are successful. That this isn't just a check the box, one-off, hey, this was a phase or experiment. This is something that can be sustained. Pardon the pun on sustainability here, but these programs around sustainability sort of important, not just for our lifetimes, but for the lifetimes of future generations, that we get this right. So again, folks, I appreciate the time and look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.